August 17th, 2025. The Pacific Ocean slept beneath a velvet sky, calm and unsuspecting. Then, without warning, it was ripped open. 3 streaks of fire clawed upward from deep inside China's mainland, slicing through the darkness like blades. They were intercontinental ballistic missiles, each weighing more than 80 tons, each worth over $100 million, and each designed for one purpose: to kill thousands of Americans in a single strike. Aboard the USS Ronald Reagan, alarms shrieked to life. Red lights pulsed through narrow corridors as sailors leapt from bunks, adrenaline surging. On radar screens, 3 burning dots screamed across the globe at Mach 20, over 15,000 miles per hour. The countdown began, 12 minutes until impact. Commanders barked orders. The Aegis combat system locked on, its digital eyes tracking every move. THAAD interceptors rose, streaking into the night. At 180 miles out, one warhead shattered in a blinding flash. Seconds later, another disintegrated in the stratosphere. Relief surged, but only for a heartbeat. The third missile was different. Lower, faster, cloaked by electronic countermeasures. It punched through the defense ring, its fiery tail locked on the Reagan. In that moment, 5,000 sailors braced for annihilation. And then, something even more terrifying happened. The final interceptor launched, a desperate streak of fire cutting through the night. An SM-6 missile, America's last shield, slammed into the incoming warhead. The detonation lit the sky brighter than lightning, but it was too close. The shockwave rolled over the Ronald Reagan like a sledgehammer. Metal screamed. A hole 20 feet wide tore open along the starboard hull, jagged steel curling outward. Inside, 7 sailors were hurled against bulkheads with bone-breaking force. Above deck, a fully armed FA-18 Super Hornet, worth $70 million, was lifted from its landing gear and flung into the ocean like a toy. The Reagan shuddered, alarms howling across every deck. Fire suppression crews sprinted towards smoke billowing through compartments. For the first time since World War II, a U.S. aircraft carrier had been scarred by enemy fire. Yet in the chaos, something vital remained. The ship still floated. The engines still roared. The carrier, though wounded, was alive. And so were the thousands aboard who had braced for death. But the sailors knew this was no isolated strike. China had drawn first blood, and Washington would not let it go unanswered. Orders were already racing across secure lines. The world was about to witness America's fury. 3:01 a.m. Pacific Time. The USS Ronald Reagan still smoldered as Rear Admiral Thomas Caldwell demanded a secure line to Washington. His voice was steady, but the message carried fury. This was no warning shot. This was an assassination attempt against 5,000 Americans. Within minutes, the Pentagon briefed President Donald Trump. Screens glowed with casualty reports, damage assessments, and live radar tracking of Chinese launch sites. Advisors urged restraint, sanctions, negotiations, a measured response. But the president had heard enough. At 3:08 a.m., he leaned forward and gave 4 words. Strike back. Make it count. The order unlocked a storm. EA-18. G Growlers would lead, jamming Chinese radar across a 200-mile corridor. Behind them, 4 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, each a $2.2 billion ghost in the sky, armed with 30,000-pound bunker busters. Tomahawk cruise missiles, range 1,000 miles, would follow seconds later, raining destruction on missile factories and fuel depots. Overhead, F-35 Lightning IIs formed a shield of air superiority. On the Reagan's flight deck, catapults thundered. Jets screamed into the darkness, one after another, until the night sky roared with American steel. Sailors stood in silence, watching. The counterstrike was airborne, and what it was about to unleash would shake the Chinese mainland to its core. 3:30 a.m. The Pacific sky vibrated with power. First came the Growlers, their electronic warfare pods screaming invisible noise across the ether. Chinese radar towers from Fujian to Guangdong lit up with static. Screens went blind. Their vaunted Great Wall of air defense had been silenced in seconds. Then came the shadows. At 3:47 a.m., 4 B-2 Spirit bombers slipped across the sky, their radar cross-sections no larger than a bird. Deep inside their bomb bays rested GBU-57 bunker busters, each weighing 30,000 pounds, steel monsters capable of slicing through 200 feet of reinforced concrete before erupting with the force of 11 tons of TNT. Simultaneously, 15 Tomahawk cruise missiles skimmed the waves at treetop height, their guidance systems locked with GPS precision. The timing was orchestrated. B-2 bombs first, Tomahawks seconds later, merging into a single overwhelming blast wave. At 4:02 a.m., the Earth itself trembled. Qingdao's missile production facility, an underground complex the size of 40 football fields, collapsed inward as bunker busters detonated. A fireball half a mile wide consumed the ruins. Minutes later, a fuel depot in Fujian ignited, flames climbing 2,000 feet into the sky. The message was clear. China had struck. America had answered. Louder. But this was only the first blow. The fire still raged in Qingdao when Beijing's war rooms descended into chaos. Generals shouted across fractured comms, officers scrambled to re-establish command, and massive screens flickered with red warnings. Entire brigades had been reduced to silence. 3 strategic bases crippled in less than an hour. For decades, China had boasted that its missile wall was impenetrable, that no foreign force could strike the mainland without catastrophic losses. Now, those boasts lay buried under burning concrete. Reports confirmed over 300 dead, 200 wounded, and 2 major generals among the casualties. The humiliation was staggering, but humiliation quickly turned to fury. At 4:30 a.m., Beijing issued its answer: massive retaliation. The 2nd Artillery Corps, the guardians of China's nuclear arsenal, received sealed orders. Launch crews sprinted underground, opening safes and retrieving twin keys. Technicians fueled missiles in silos across Inner Mongolia and Sichuan, while commanders barked countdowns into headsets. At 4:42 a.m., the ground itself shook. 20 intercontinental ballistic missiles clawed skyward, fireballs erupting from silos, their trails lighting the night like burning spears. Civilians filmed from rooftops, watching streaks of death race into the stratosphere. Their targets were clear: Los Angeles, San Francisco, Honolulu, Seattle, American soil. The nightmare of nuclear war had just begun. Air raid sirens wailed across the Pacific coast. In Los Angeles, freeways jammed as families tried to flee. In Honolulu, churches opened their doors as people fell to their knees in prayer. Across America, the unthinkable had arrived. Nuclear missiles were inbound. But this was not the 1950s. America's shield was awake. From Fort Greely, Alaska, 44 ground-based interceptors streaked upward at 22,000 miles per hour, their thrusters tearing into the exo-atmosphere. Along the Pacific, Aegis destroyers fired volleys of SM-3 interceptors, kinetic warheads designed to shatter incoming missiles with the force of a 10-ton truck at 1,000 miles per hour. In Guam and Hawaii, THAAD batteries lit the night sky with counterfire, while Patriot PAC-3 systems guarded cities below. Above them, satellites tracked every trajectory, guiding interceptors with precision measured in inches. The battle unfolded in space, silent, unseen, except on command screens glowing with dots and lines. One by one, Chinese warheads winked out. Some detonated in fiery blossoms, others broke apart into harmless fragments. Minutes later, the last warhead hurtled toward U.S. soil. At 200 miles out, an interceptor struck dead center. The warhead disintegrated into glowing debris over the Pacific. 20 launched, 20 destroyed. 0 U.S. cities hit. But America's shield was only half the story. The sword was still waiting. The world held its breath. China had unleashed its deadliest weapons, and America had stopped every single one. But Washington knew defense alone would not end the threat. At 5:15 a.m., U.S. Strategic Command issued the order: Operation Iron Thunder. From Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, 3 B-2 Spirits and the first operational B-21 Raider lifted into the sky. carrying payloads of 80,000 pounds of precision ordnance. In the Pacific, 48 F-35 Lightning IIs roared from carriers, armed with AMRAAMs and JDAM bombs. Tankers climbed beside them, ready to fuel the sky for 12 continuous hours of combat. Then came the most fearsome move. Ohio-class submarines, silent beneath the waves, opened their launch hatches in unison. 96 Tomahawk cruise missiles leapt into the night, hugging the Earth at treetop height, invisible to radar, each locked on critical Chinese targets. At 5:54 a.m. local time, the first explosions tore through Yulin Naval Base, ripping open submarine pens carved into stone cliffs. Fuel depots ignited. Warheads detonated. 4 nuclear subs, each worth billions, were annihilated at dock. The strike had begun, and it was merciless. But this was only the first wave of iron thunder. The real devastation was yet to come. The shockwaves from Yulin still echoed when the second hammer fell. Over Sichuan, the night sky split as a B-2 bomber released 2 GBU-57 bunker busters. 30,000 pounds each, they drilled deep into the earth before detonating. The target, a sprawling ICBM assembly plant in Chengdu, responsible for producing 20 nuclear-capable missiles a year. In less than a minute, 600,000 square feet of reinforced concrete collapsed. Assembly lines were flattened. Missile casings crumpled like paper. The inferno consumed decades of investment, gone in seconds. Simultaneously, east of Shanghai, another strike group descended on Xiangyang Air Base. F-35s tore through the clouds, JDAM bombs screaming downward. Hardened aircraft shelters erupted in fireballs. The roar of secondary explosions rolled across the countryside as 11 H-6K nuclear bombers, each worth $60 million, were shredded before they could even start their engines. Flames lit the horizon like a sunrise of steel and smoke. By dawn, China's strategic arsenal was bleeding. Submarines, factories, bombers, all crippled in a single coordinated blow. And yet, as America's war machine pushed deeper, commanders knew this victory carried a shadow. Because a humiliated dragon does not retreat, it strikes back harder. As the sun rose over Asia, the scope of America's strike was undeniable. Satellite images spread across the globe, each frame showing devastation. Submarine pens torn open, bomber wings reduced to twisted wreckage, and an ICBM factory flattened to rubble. In Europe, NATO leaders convened emergency sessions. Publicly, they praised America's precision, calling it proof that the free world's guardian still held its sword high. Privately, they trembled, knowing the Pacific had just edged closer to total war. In Tokyo, officials hailed the strike as the largest single-night operation since the Gulf War, a demonstration that America's shield and sword could still keep allies safe. In London, analysts calculated the damage, over $20 billion in Chinese military assets destroyed, more than some nations spend on defense in an entire year. In Moscow, the Kremlin urged restraint, but behind closed doors, Russian generals whispered their shock. Not even Russia's most advanced systems could have survived a strike so coordinated, so precise. Meanwhile, in Beijing, silence hung heavy. Generals who once boasted of invincibility now stared at burning ruins. A generation of buildup had been erased in hours. And yet the danger was not over, because a wounded dragon was still coiled to strike. By August 18, 2025, the balance of power in the Pacific had been rewritten in fire. In less than 12 hours, America had unleashed more than 200,000 pounds of explosives, erased 3 strategic Chinese bases, destroyed 4 nuclear submarines, crippled an ICBM plant, and burned 11 bombers to ash. More than 1,500 Chinese troops were dead or wounded. For Americans, the result was clear. Not a single city struck, not a single civilian lost. The shield had held, the sword had cut, and the Navy had endured its trial by fire. For older generations, the echoes were chilling. It felt like the Cuban Missile Crisis all over again. But this time, missiles had actually flown. On Chinese state television, anchors struggled for words. Humiliation rippled through military ranks, and fury brewed in the Politburo. A dragon had been wounded, but not slain. And history teaches a grim lesson. A cornered power does not submit. It prepares. As dawn broke, silence fell over the Pacific, fragile and uneasy. Sailors on the Reagan looked across the horizon, knowing the night's battle had been only the opening act. Because this wasn't the end of a war. It was the beginning of one.